All right, so we are taking a look at the Unit 4A review sheet. So the first section is on invention and innovation. So number one, what were some of the causes of the Industrial Revolution? We'll talk about four of them here. There was some new technology and inventions and new innovations. There were new types of business organizations, specifically corporations, that allowed companies to raise a lot of money and grow fast. There was a lot of immigration during this time period, which gave access to a larger workforce and a lot of laborers who were willing to work for cheap. And we have tons of available natural resources in the United States, things like wood and coal and iron ore to make steel, things like that. Specifically, some of the three new inventions or innovations during this time period was the light bulb. This allowed factories to operate over 24 hours a day. The telegraph, which allowed communication over long distances, and the automobile, which allowed for quicker transportation over long distances of workers, of material, things like that. Finally, what was Henry Bessemer's contribution to the Industrial Revolution? He came up with what we call the Bessemer process, which was a cheaper, more efficient way to produce steel, which allowed factories to grow, railroads to grow, etc. Excuse me. Question two: how did business organizations change during the Industrial Revolution? So, a lot of business organizations moved away from being sole proprietorships, which are businesses owned and run by one person, to corporations, which again were a type of business organization that sold stock and allowed the business to raise a lot of money to grow. So, specifically, again, some of these advantages: the corporations could raise a lot of money to grow. Corporations also limited risk to investors by spreading the risk out among stockholders, and it allowed these investors to get very rich through both dividends and capital gains from selling their stock. Number three, the overall economic policy during this time period was laissez-faire capitalism. This essentially means hands off. More specifically, it means the government's hands off businesses. Little to no regulations, no protections for workers, few rules, low taxes. This laissez-faire system allowed for businesses to grow, but it did lead to some dangerous conditions for workers and resulted in a big gap between the rich and the poor. Number four, this lack of regulation led to the growth of monopolies and trusts. So, monopoly is when one company essentially controls the entire marketplace or entire field of business for a certain product. And a trust is when there's a group of corporations in the same field combined together under a single board of trustees. So, monopolies and trusts are very similar in that one big business controls much of the market for a certain product. Number five, how do these monopolies and trusts hurt consumers or customers? So monopolies and trusts limit competition, they limit consumer choice, and they can also lead to higher prices for buyers. Number six, these tycoons like Carnegie, Rockefeller, JP Morgan, guys like that, they were known as both robber barons and captains of industry. As far as them being known as robber barons, this is kind of the negative way to describe these guys. They got very rich off the labor of their workers. They made their workers work in poor conditions. They tended to limit competition and be very ruthless and drive other companies out of business. But they also did some positive things too. So describing them as captains of industry is because they helped the economy grow. They did employ thousands and thousands of workers, and many were philanthropists. So number seven will define that term, philanthropists. What that means is these guys donated a lot of money to places that would basically benefit society. Places that would help people better themselves, like schools, museums, hospitals, libraries. Again, that idea of philanthropy means you donate a lot of your money. Moving on to immigration, number eight, we kind of divide our immigrants that we talk about during this time period between old immigrants and new immigrants. The old immigrants were primarily from Northern or Western Europe, places like England, Ireland, and Germany, whereas the new immigrants were from Southern and Eastern Europe, places like Italy, Russia, and Poland. And overall, with this next question here, the new immigrants had a harder time assimilating or kind of adopting American culture and fitting in because many of the new immigrants did not speak English. They practiced different religions like Judaism or Orthodox Christianity, and many lived in the ethnic enclaves or ethnic neighborhoods and cities that we call ghettos. Number nine, what drew a lot of these immigrants to the United States from the 1820s to the 1920s? There were a variety of factors, including economic opportunity, industrial jobs, especially in big cities, the availability of land, especially out west, and also the opportunity for political and religious freedom they didn't have in their home countries. That's it for the first video. We'll pick up with number 11 when we come back.